Matt Anderson always considered his life to be comfortable. At 37, he was a software engineer with a modest home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. His wife, Lisa, was the vibrant, social half of their union, balancing Matt's reserved nature with her infectious energy. They had been married for 11 years, and though not without its challenges, their marriage had always seemed steady. At least, that's what Matt believed. Lately, though, Lisa had been distant. It started subtly, an extra layer of perfume when she went to the gym, late-night texts she explained as work emergencies, and an air of defensiveness whenever Matt asked about her day. He noticed her phone was now always face down on the table, and the once natural conversations about their lives seemed strained, almost artificial. The warm familiarity that had been the foundation of their relationship felt like it was slowly eroding, leaving Matt with a gnawing sense of unease. Matt tried to push the thoughts aside. Work had been hectic, with looming deadlines, and he chalked up Lisa's changes to stress or just the natural ebb and flow of marriage. Still, an undercurrent of doubt crept into his mind. He didn't want to believe anything could be wrong. Lisa was his partner, his confidant, the person who had always stood by him. One night, Matt came home later than usual. The house was dark except for the faint glow from the upstairs bedroom. Lisa's laughter drifted down the staircase, light and airy, but it didn't sound like the kind of laugh she reserved for him anymore. It was playful in a way that pricked his ears, tinged with a kind of giddy excitement. Pausing at the bottom of the stairs, Matt called out, "Lisa? I'm home." The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by the hurried sound of footsteps. Lisa appeared at the top of the staircase, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "Oh, hey! You're back early," she said, her voice forcedly casual. "Everything okay?" Matt asked, trying to keep his tone light. "Yeah, of course," Lisa replied quickly. "Just talking to Kelsey about her new job." She gestured vaguely with her phone before tucking it into her pocket. "How was work?" "Fine," Matt said, though he was certain he caught the faintest flush of color on her cheeks. Something about the way she avoided his gaze gnawed at him, but he told himself not to jump to conclusions. He had no reason not to trust her. Right. Over the next few days, Matt couldn't shake the sense that something was off. Lisa's habits shifted further. She left the house earlier in the mornings and came home later, often claiming she had errands or a book club meeting. On one occasion, Matt offered to pick her up from yoga night, but Lisa's response was unusually curt. "I don't need a babysitter, Matt." The growing distance was like a silent intruder in their home, settling into every corner of their lives. Matt tried to bridge the gap, suggesting date nights and planning a weekend getaway. Lisa's excuses were endless: work deadlines, a friend's birthday, or just sheer exhaustion. Then came the evening that would start to unravel the threads of their marriage. While Lisa was in the shower, Matt sat on the couch scrolling through his email when her phone, left carelessly on the coffee table, buzzed. It wasn't unusual for Lisa's phone to go off, but the message that flashed across the screen made Matt freeze. "I can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again?" Matt's stomach dropped. The sender's name wasn't familiar, just a single initial. D. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the screen, the words searing into his brain. For a long moment, Matt sat paralyzed. The rational part of him screamed not to jump to conclusions, that this could be a misunderstanding. But another part, the part that had been tallying the late nights, the secrecy, and the shifting behavior, told him that the truth was something far worse than he was ready to face. Lisa emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, her hair damp and clinging to her shoulders. She smiled at him, but Matt couldn't bring himself to return it. The warmth that once filled their home now felt like a hollow mockery. "Everything okay?" Lisa asked, pausing when she noticed the tension in his expression. "Yeah," Matt lied, his voice strained. "Everything's fine." But nothing was fine. And deep down, he knew their lives were about to change forever. Matt barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, the message on Lisa's phone replayed like a broken record in his mind. "I can't stop thinking about last night." It felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. He wanted to confront her right away, to demand answers, but a voice in the back of his head whispered that he needed more. A single message wasn't proof of an affair. He needed certainty, no matter how painful the truth might be. By morning, Matt had made his decision. He wasn't proud of it, but the fear of being deceived gnawed at him relentlessly. While Lisa was in the shower, he grabbed her phone. His hands trembled slightly as he navigated to her messages. The thread from D was short. Only a few texts exchanged, but it was enough to paint a vivid picture. D. Friday night was perfect. Can't wait to see you again. Lisa. I know. I'll let you know when Matt's working late. Matt felt his throat tighten, a strange cocktail of fury and heartbreak. As he placed the phone back where he found it, Lisa's voice floated from upstairs. Hey! Can you make me some coffee? Matt forced his shaking hands to steady themselves as he filled the kettle. The worst part was the ease with which she carried on. She laughed, kissed him on the cheek, and made small talk about the weather. To Lisa, everything was normal. But for Matt, nothing would ever feel normal again. That night, after Lisa fell asleep, Matt sat in the dim glow of his laptop screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he typed the words that felt foreign and surreal. How to catch a cheating spouse. The search results flooded the screen, articles, forums, and private investigator ads. He read story after story from strangers detailing their own experiences. As he sifted through the mess of online advice, one suggestion kept cropping up: surveillance. Matt hesitated. Invading Lisa's privacy felt like crossing a line, but hadn't she already crossed one? By the following evening, a small GPS tracker was discreetly installed beneath the driver's seat of Lisa's car. Matt told himself it was just a precaution. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe he was being paranoid. He almost hoped he was. But a sinking feeling told him otherwise. The next week felt like torture. Matt checked the tracker obsessively, monitoring Lisa's movements like a man possessed. For the most part, her schedule seemed normal: work, gym, grocery runs. Nothing unusual. Then, on Thursday, her car pinged at a location Matt didn't recognize. An upscale hotel downtown. She was there for 2 hours. Matt stared at the blinking dot on the map, bow rising in his throat. There was no reason for Lisa to be at that hotel. None. He forced himself to stay calm, to avoid drawing attention. When Lisa came home that night, she greeted him with the same warm, practiced smile she'd been wearing for weeks. Long day? Matt asked carefully. Yeah, we had a client dinner, Lisa replied without hesitation. Ran late. I'm exhausted. Matt nodded as if he believed her. But inside, his heart felt like it was breaking apart piece by piece. Friday night, Matt took things a step further. He told Lisa he had to work late, though his real plans involved parking his car a few blocks away from the hotel he now knew too well. He watched from the shadows as Lisa's car pulled into the parking lot, heart hammering against his ribs. It wasn't long before another vehicle arrived. A black SUV. Matt squinted as a man emerged, but his breath caught in his throat when he saw who it was. His father. Richard Anderson. Matt sat frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. His father, widowed for nearly 6 years, walked casually toward Lisa's car. She stepped out, laughing as Richard leaned in to kiss her. The embrace was familiar, too familiar. Matt's world tilted. His grip tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to burst out of the car, to stop whatever was happening, but his legs felt rooted to the floor. Instead, he grabbed his phone and began to record. They walked into the hotel together, unaware of Matt's silent gaze burning through the windshield. Matt didn't return home that night. He drove aimlessly through empty streets, trying to piece together how his wife and his father had become this. By dawn, he was sitting alone in a roadside diner, staring blankly at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The video played on loop in his mind, each frame driving the knife deeper into his chest. It wasn't just betrayal. It was betrayal from the two people he had trusted most. The thought made him feel sick. When Matt finally returned home the next day, Lisa was in the kitchen humming to herself as if nothing had happened. She kissed his cheek when he walked in, oblivious to the storm swirling behind his eyes. "Hey," she said, smiling. "You look exhausted. Long night?" Matt swallowed hard, nodding. "Yeah. Long night." But the real long night was still ahead. Because Matt wasn't going to let this go. Not by a long shot. Matt felt like he was moving through molasses, every breath heavy with the weight of what he had seen. Days passed in a haze. Lisa continued to live her life as if nothing had happened, oblivious to the fact that Matt's world had splintered into pieces. But Matt saw everything differently now. He noticed the way Lisa's phone was always tucked away, the private smiles she thought he didn't catch, and the newfound bounce in her step whenever she went to the gym. His father's voice, once a comforting presence, now felt like a betrayal etched into his bones. The worst part was the pretending. Matt played his role perfectly, the loving husband who didn't suspect a thing. Each kiss, each meal shared at their table felt like swallowing glass, but he smiled through it. Because he needed time. Time to figure out what the hell he was going to do. Matt's plan started small. He began gathering every piece of evidence he could: photos, text screenshots, hotel records from the GPS tracker. Late one night, while Lisa slept soundly beside him, he quietly downloaded months' worth of phone records. A nauseating number of calls were placed to his father's number, sometimes late at night, sometimes during Matt's shifts at work. It wasn't just physical. This had been going on for months. Maybe longer. Matt sat in his home office, staring at the data. His knuckles went white as he gripped the mouse. His first impulse was to confront Lisa right then and there. But what would that accomplish? She would lie. They both would. No, Matt wanted to tear down their carefully built charade. Piece by piece. His opportunity arrived the following weekend. Lisa was heading to the spa for the day, her voice light and breezy as she kissed Matt goodbye. He watched from the window as her car pulled out of the driveway, his jaw clenched. But Matt wasn't staying home. He tailed her. At first, her route appeared innocent enough, taking the usual turn toward the upscale spa she often mentioned. But just a few blocks away, she veered off toward the downtown district. Matt followed at a distance, careful to stay out of sight. His stomach dropped when Lisa pulled into the same hotel he had watched her visit just days before. Matt parked down the street, sitting in silence as he watched her step out of the car. Within minutes, his father's SUV arrived, the two of them meeting at the entrance like a rehearsed dance. Matt didn't record this time. He didn't need more proof. He needed to decide his next move. That evening, Lisa returned home glowing. She slipped her arms around Matt from behind as he washed dishes, pressing a soft kiss to the back of his neck. "Miss me today?" she teased, resting her head against his shoulder. Matt forced himself to smile, placing a plate in the drying rack. "Always." Her laugh rang out, light and careless. Later, as she curled up on the couch beside him with a glass of wine, Matt watched her out of the corner of his eye. She looked content, happy even. It enraged him how easily she could compartmentalize her deceit. But Matt's patience was waning. On Tuesday, Matt did something he never imagined himself doing. He met with a divorce attorney. Sarah Blackwood's office was sleek and cold, much like her demeanor. She skimmed over Matt's file, raising a brow as she reviewed the evidence he had gathered. "This is substantial," she admitted, sliding the photos back into their folder. "But before we proceed, I have to ask, are you certain about this route?" Matt's voice was hard. "I'm sure." Sarah tapped her pen thoughtfully. "The fact that it's with your father complicates things. Have you spoken to either of them about it?" "No." She folded her hands on the desk. "Good. The element of surprise is our greatest advantage. We'll hit them with everything at once: divorce, paternity testing if necessary, and financial freezes." Matt nodded, staring blankly at the leather-bound file in front of him. "I want the house," he said quietly. "She can leave." Sarah smirked. "Oh, she will." Trust me. By the time Matt returned home that night, a storm had begun brewing on the horizon. Lisa was in the kitchen making dinner, humming softly to herself as Matt dropped his keys on the counter. "You're home late," she commented. "Got caught up at work," Matt replied. Lisa smiled. "I made lasagna. Your favorite." He stared at her for a long moment, wondering if she genuinely believed things could continue like this forever. "That's great," Matt said, forcing himself to sit at the table. But as Lisa dished out dinner, Matt felt the clock ticking down toward the inevitable explosion that was coming. And he was ready for it. Matt's fingers drummed against the steering wheel as he sat outside his childhood home the next day. It was the same house he had spent countless Christmas mornings and Sunday dinners in. But now it felt foreign. His father's SUV was parked in the driveway. Matt considered leaving. He wasn't ready for this, wasn't ready to see Richard's face, to hear whatever pathetic excuse he might conjure. But something inside him hardened. He couldn't keep living with this weight pressing down on him. Matt climbed out of the car and walked to the front door. The familiar creak of the porch floorboards beneath his feet felt different now. When his father answered the door, Matt saw the flicker of surprise flash across his face. "Matt? This is unexpected." Richard's eyes searched his son's face carefully, but Matt could tell he wasn't nervous. "Not yet. Can we talk?" Matt's voice was calm. Too calm. "Of course, son. Come in." Matt stepped inside. The house smelled the same, wood polish and faint traces of pipe tobacco. But all it did was make Matt's stomach churn. They sat in the living room, and Richard poured 2 glasses of scotch, just like they used to do when Matt visited. But this wasn't one of those visits. "How's Lisa?" Richard asked casually, handing him the glass. Matt took the drink, but didn't touch it. He held it loosely, staring at his father for a long moment before speaking. "You tell me," Matt said quietly. Richard's hand froze halfway to his mouth. His lips pressed into a thin line as he set his glass down slowly. "What's that supposed to mean?" Matt's jaw tightened. "I know, Dad." Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Richard's eyes didn't waver, but Matt could see the shift in his demeanor. A crack in the carefully constructed facade. "I don't know what you think you know," Richard began cautiously. "Cut the bullshit," Matt snapped, the glass in his hand trembling slightly. "I saw you at the hotel." His father's face paled. Matt's heart pounded as the words spilled out. "How long?" Richard sighed heavily, rubbing his temples as if the confession weighed just as much on him as it did on Matt. "About 6 months," he admitted. Matt's stomach dropped. 6 months. "You're my father," Matt growled. "How could you do this to me? To Mom's memory?" Richard's eyes darkened. "Don't bring your mother into this," he said sharply. "Things aren't always as black and white as you think, Matt." Matt shot to his feet, the scotch splashing onto the carpet as he set the glass down harder than he intended. "I trusted you. Lisa trusted you. And this is what you do with it." "She came to me, Matt," Richard said, standing as well. His voice was even, but Matt saw the flicker of guilt in his eyes. "I didn't chase her. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. But it did." Matt's head spun. The words blurred together in his ears. "You're unbelievable," Matt said, his hand shaking. Richard stepped closer, placing a hand on Matt's shoulder. "I know this is hard." "Don't," Matt growled, jerking away. His father's face hardened, but he said nothing more. Matt didn't need to hear any excuses. As he stormed out of the house, he heard Richard's voice behind him. "For what it's worth. I'm sorry." The apology felt hollow, a weak attempt to patch the gaping hole between them. Matt didn't look back. That night, Matt sat in his office, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating the dark room. Lisa had already gone to bed, unaware of where Matt had been. He pulled up his email and reread the message from Sarah Blackwood. She was moving forward with the divorce papers and gathering financial records. Matt's eyes flicked to the GPS tracker app. Lisa's car was at home, but she had spent 3 hours downtown earlier that day, probably with Richard. Matt closed the app and stared blankly at his reflection in the darkened window. His marriage was already over. Now it was just a matter of watching it burn. But Matt wasn't planning to be collateral damage. The next morning, Matt found Lisa in the kitchen, sipping coffee as she scrolled through her phone. "Morning," she said with a soft smile. "Morning," Matt replied, leaning against the counter. He watched her carefully, studying every movement, every flicker of emotion. "Big plans today?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. Lisa glanced up briefly. "Not really. Might grab lunch with Kelsey." Matt nodded slowly. "That sounds nice." Lisa's phone buzzed, and Matt's eyes flicked to the screen just long enough to catch the name flashing across it. Richard. Lisa set the phone down face down, as she always did. Matt's heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. "I've got some things to take care of," Matt said, finishing his coffee. Lisa kissed his cheek as he passed. "See you tonight?" Matt smiled faintly. "Yeah. See you tonight." But as he walked out the door, he wasn't heading to work. He was heading to Sarah's office. It was time to finish what he started. Matt sat across from Sarah Blackwood, his hands clasped tightly together. The office was quiet, save for the faint hum of traffic outside the window. Sarah's eyes flicked between the legal documents spread across her desk, her pen tapping rhythmically against her notebook. "We're ready to move forward," she said at last, her voice crisp and direct. "I'll file the divorce petition today. I assume you still want the house?" Matt nodded. "She can leave. I want her out as soon as possible." Sarah jotted something down. "And your father?" Matt's jaw clenched. "He's not part of this. This is between me and Lisa." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "All right. But don't expect things to stay that clean. Affairs like this, they bleed over. You might want to prepare yourself for that." Matt exhaled slowly, nodding. "I'll have the papers drawn up by the end of the week. She'll be served next Monday," Sarah continued. "I'd advise you to stay calm when it happens. It's going to get ugly." Matt ran a hand through his hair. "I'm already living in the ugly part, Sarah." She gave him a knowing look. "You haven't seen ugly yet." Matt returned home that evening just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The house was warm and glowing from the lights Lisa had turned on, casting long shadows across the walls. From the kitchen, he could hear her humming softly, the faint clatter of dishes as she prepared dinner. For a fleeting moment, Matt thought about pretending that none of this was happening. That they were just two ordinary people living an ordinary life. But that version of their life no longer existed. He stepped into the kitchen, watching Lisa slice vegetables at the counter. She smiled when she saw him. "Hey," she said, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "You're home early. I thought you had a meeting with the guys from work?" Matt forced a tight smile. "It was cancelled." Lisa nodded, returning her focus to the cutting board. "I was thinking we could open a bottle of wine tonight," she said. "It's been a while since we had a quiet night in." Matt's heart twisted painfully. She was still acting. Still keeping up appearances. "I think I'm just going to head to bed early," Matt replied, his voice strained. Lisa glanced at him, concern flickering in her eyes. "Everything okay?" Matt met her gaze for a moment, and for a split second, he saw the woman he had married, the one he had built his life around. "I'm fine," he lied, turning away. Later that night, Matt sat in his office, staring at the manila envelope Sarah had given him. The divorce papers were inside, neatly stacked and waiting for his signature. The house was silent, save for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Lisa was asleep in their bedroom, unaware of what was coming. Matt reached for a pen, his hand hovering over the signature line. But he hesitated. It wasn't the act of signing the papers that troubled him. It was what came next. The confrontation. The unraveling of everything they had built together. A part of him still wanted to believe there was something worth saving. But the image of Lisa and his father at that hotel, wrapped in each other's arms, shattered any hope he had left. With a deep breath, Matt pressed the pen to the paper and signed his name. The following morning, Matt woke early. Lisa was still asleep, her breathing soft and even. He stood at the doorway for a long time, watching her. Would she regret this? Would she feel the same emptiness he felt? He doubted it. By noon, Sarah's assistant had arrived to collect the papers. The wheels were in motion. There was no turning back now. That evening, Matt waited for Lisa to return from her yoga class. He sat in the living room, the television off, his eyes fixed on the front door. When she walked in, she paused, sensing the shift in the air. "Hey," she said cautiously, setting her bag down. "Everything all right?" Matt's expression didn't waver. "Sit down." Lisa blinked, her smile fading. "What?" "I said sit down, Lisa." Her eyes narrowed, but she did as he asked, lowering herself onto the couch. Matt set the envelope on the coffee table between them. "What's this?" Lisa asked, her voice brittle. "You tell me," Matt replied calmly. Lisa reached for the envelope, pulling out the papers. As her eyes scanned the contents, her face paled. "Divorce?" she breathed, looking up at him in shock. "I know," Matt said simply. Lisa's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time in months, Matt saw genuine fear in her eyes. "Matt, don't," he interrupted, his voice hard. "I've seen everything, Lisa. The hotels. The messages. And I know it's been going on for months." Lisa's eyes welled with tears, but Matt felt nothing. "You could have told me the truth," he continued. "Instead, you kept lying. You lied to my face every day. And the worst part? You did it with him." Lisa's lip trembled. "Matt, I never meant." "I don't care," he cut her off. "You can keep making excuses, but it doesn't matter anymore." Tears rolled down Lisa's cheeks as she tried to compose herself. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. Matt leaned forward, meeting her gaze. "You didn't just hurt me, Lisa. You destroyed everything we had." She looked away, guilt washing over her face. "So what now?" she asked softly. "You'll leave," Matt said. "The papers are filed. You have until the end of the week to pack your things." Lisa stared at him, as if hoping for a chance at redemption. But Matt's face was cold, unyielding. There was no forgiveness left to give. The house felt heavier after that night. Lisa moved through it like a ghost, her footsteps softer, her presence thinner. She said little to Matt, and he didn't go out of his way to speak to her. They lived as strangers under the same roof, the air between them thick with the weight of everything left unsaid. Matt spent most of his time in the office, drowning in work he didn't care about. Anything to distract him from the sound of Lisa moving about the house, packing pieces of her life into boxes. On Thursday morning, Matt woke to the faint sound of cardboard being taped shut. From the doorway, he watched Lisa kneeling by the bed, folding clothes with shaky hands. She sensed him and looked up, offering a weak smile. "I'm almost done," she said quietly. "I'll be out by tomorrow." Matt nodded. "Good." She bit her lip, as if she wanted to say something more. But instead, she just kept folding. That afternoon, Matt's phone buzzed as he sat at his desk, staring blankly at his laptop. "Dad, Richard, can we talk?" Matt's grip tightened around the phone. "No." The reply came instantly. "Dad, Richard, I'm sorry, Matt." Matt tossed the phone onto his desk and leaned back in his chair, pinching the bridge of his nose. His father's apologies didn't matter. Not now. The damage was done. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lisa emerged from the bedroom with a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. "I'm staying at Kelsey's tonight," she said softly, pausing by the door. Matt barely looked up from the television. "Okay." Lisa hesitated. "Matt, I know you don't want to hear it, but I am sorry." He muted the TV and finally met her gaze. "Sorry doesn't change anything." Lisa's face crumpled, and she nodded faintly. "I know." As she opened the door to leave, Matt spoke again. You can pick up the rest of your stuff tomorrow. She glanced back at him, her eyes glassy. I will. And with that, she was gone. Matt sat in silence, staring at the empty space where she had just stood. For the first time in weeks, the house felt peaceful. The next day, Matt returned home from work to find Lisa's car in the driveway. She was finishing up, carrying the last of the boxes out the front door. He didn't go inside right away. Instead, he stood by his car, watching as Lisa packed the trunk. She didn't notice him at first. When she did, she froze, her eyes locking with his across the yard. Matt offered no words. There was nothing left to say. Lisa closed the trunk, hesitating for a long moment before walking over to him. I'm leaving the keys inside, she said quietly. I guess this is it. Matt crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. I guess so. Lisa's eyes flickered with something, regret maybe. But Matt didn't let it in. She reached for his hand. Take care of yourself, Matt. He pulled his hand away. You too, he said, his voice cool and distant. Lisa nodded, blinking back tears as she walked toward her car. Matt watched as she drove away, the taillights shrinking into the distance. By the time he stepped inside, the house felt cavernous, echoes bouncing off empty spaces where furniture once stood. But for the first time, Matt wasn't overwhelmed by the silence. That night, Matt poured himself a glass of scotch and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the empty driveway. He expected to feel relief. Or satisfaction. But all he felt was exhaustion. The betrayal still hung over him like a shadow, but at least the worst was over. Or so he thought. The next morning, Matt received a text that made his stomach drop. Dad, Richard, I think we need to talk. Something's happened. Matt didn't respond right away. He wasn't ready to face his father, not after everything. But something about the message gnawed at him. After a long pause, he replied, I'll be over this afternoon. At 3 p.m., Matt stood outside Richard's house, bracing himself for whatever confrontation awaited him. When his father opened the door, Matt's eyes narrowed at the sight of him. Richard looked older somehow, more worn down than Matt remembered. Come in, Richard said quietly, stepping aside. Matt entered, crossing his arms as he stood in the middle of the living room. What do you want? He asked, his tone sharp. Richard sat down heavily on the couch, running a hand through his graying hair. Lisa left me. Matt froze. What? Richard looked up, shame flickering across his face. She ended things. Said she needed to figure herself out. Matt felt an unexpected pang of satisfaction. Well, that's ironic. Richard let out a humorless laugh. Yeah. I guess it is. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Richard broke the silence. Look, Matt. I know I've screwed up. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I wanted you to know that I regret it. All of it. Matt's jaw tightened. Good. His father nodded slowly. I'll give you space. I'm sorry, son. Matt didn't reply. As he left the house, Richard's words echoed in his head. But Matt wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Matt avoided his father for weeks. The betrayal alone had been enough to sever their relationship, but the gnawing suspicion that something more was lurking beneath the surface wouldn't leave him. One evening, as Matt sat alone at home, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. Lisa, voicemail. We need to talk. Please, Matt. It's important. He let it ring out. He wasn't interested in what she had to say. But Lisa wasn't giving up. The next day, Matt opened his front door to find her standing there, her face pale and anxious. What do you want, Lisa? He said coldly, not stepping aside. Lisa hesitated, wringing her hands. Can I come in? It's serious. Matt crossed his arms. Serious? You mean like sleeping with my father? Her face contorted with guilt, but she didn't snap back like he expected. Matt, I'm pregnant. The words hit him like a freight train. His eyes locked onto hers, searching for any sign that this was some kind of cruel joke. But Lisa's face told him everything he needed to know. Matt's lips parted, but no sound came out. His heart hammered painfully in his chest. I didn't know how to tell you, Lisa continued, her voice trembling. I wanted to believe it was yours at first, but I can't lie to you. Matt took a step back, as if the distance between them could soften the blow. It's his, isn't it? His voice cracked, disbelief laced with fury. Lisa nodded slowly. I'm sorry, Matt. For a moment, Matt thought the room might spin. His fists clenched at his sides as he struggled to contain the eruption of anger welling inside him. How long have you known? He demanded, his voice like ice. A few weeks, she whispered. Matt let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Unbelievable. You were going to let me believe it was mine, weren't you? Lisa's silence was all the answer he needed. You need to leave, Matt growled. Matt, please. I didn't mean for this to happen. I said leave. He cut her off, voice trembling. I don't want to see you. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here. Not after this. Tears welled in Lisa's eyes, but she didn't argue. She knew there was nothing left to say. As she walked out the door, Matt's knees nearly buckled beneath him. The betrayal had cut deeper than he thought possible. But the worst part? The child growing inside Lisa's womb was still his blood, just not in the way he had ever imagined. Days blurred together after Lisa's confession. Matt didn't speak to his father, and Lisa's presence in his life dissolved as quickly as it had unraveled. But the weight of her pregnancy hung over him like a storm cloud. Late one evening, Matt sat alone on his porch, a half-empty bottle of whiskey resting beside him. His phone buzzed on the table. Dad, Richard. Can we talk? Matt ignored it. But the texts kept coming, day after day. Finally, Matt caved. He drove to Richard's house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. When Richard opened the door, Matt saw the same guilt-ridden expression he had worn since the affair was exposed. I didn't expect to see you, Richard said carefully. Yeah, well, either did I. Matt's voice was flat. But you wouldn't stop texting. Richard stepped aside, and Matt entered the house for the first time in months. They sat in the living room, the tension palpable. Lisa told me, Matt finally said, leaning forward. About the baby. Richard's face paled. Matt, I don't want to hear excuses, Matt snapped. I just want to know, how do you live with yourself? Richard exhaled heavily, sinking into his chair. I ask myself that every day. Matt's gaze hardened. Good. Because I'm not forgiving you. Richard met his eyes, nodding slowly. I don't expect you to. Silence lingered between them, the unspoken truth hanging heavily in the room. She's keeping the baby, Richard added quietly. I told her I'd be there. Matt's fist tightened, but he stayed composed. That's your mess to deal with now, Matt replied. But don't expect me to pretend like we're still family. Richard's expression tightened, but he didn't argue. I just want you to know that I regret it. All of it. Matt's eyes flicked toward the door. I should go. Richard stood, following him to the entryway. As Matt placed his hand on the doorknob, his father's voice stopped him. For what it's worth, Matt. I never wanted to hurt you. Matt didn't look back. Too late. Over the next few months, Matt began rebuilding his life. He repainted the house, replaced furniture Lisa had chosen, and forced himself to focus on work. The pain didn't disappear, but it dulled with time. One afternoon, as Matt repaired the fence in his backyard, his neighbor Jessica called over. Need some help? She asked, smiling. Matt considered saying no. But instead, he nodded. Yeah. I could use the company. Jessica hopped over the fence, grabbing a hammer. As they worked together, Matt felt something unfamiliar creep in, hope. Maybe he wasn't ready to forgive. But he was ready to move forward. And for now, that was enough.